Yes, I'm Kathleen Broussard, and I'm Assistant Professor of Sociology at the University of South Carolina. I'm excited to open up this session with a discussion on the meaning and measurement of unrealized fertility. As I'm sure everyone on this panel is aware, unrealized fertility and the fertility gap can be measured in very different ways, and consequently may be subject to different interpretations with varying policy implications. So today, I'm going to walk us through some of the different approaches to measuring unrealized fertility and then demonstrate how these approaches yield distinct outcomes. So let's get started. All right, great. The term unrealized fertility was first used by Kasterlein and Hahn in 2017 and is used to describe when people fail to reach their fertility goals. In Kasterlein's 2019 PAA presidential address, he laments that there really is little agreement on the term or concept. And you can kind of see on the right-hand side here many different ways that researchers have used to measure unrealized fertility and the fertility gap, including the difference between ideal and achieved fertility, the difference between actual and hypothetical fertility, planned and actual number of children, and desired and achieved. Now, while the measurement of how many children people actually end up having is pretty straightforward, we all know that these measurements of desires, ideals, intentions are a bit more complex. Additionally, as again, Kasterlein notes in his address, unrealized fertility is complicated because it is a non-event. It emerges over time and fluctuates across the reproductive life course. And while it's increasingly common in affluent, low fertility societies, he also predicts that given increasing use of highly effective contraception, and a continued decline in unintended pregnancy, that, quote, a future is coming into view in which childbearing is somewhat of a luxury good, not affordable by lower strata. Okay. So with all of this in mind, this presentation is guided by the following questions. What does the fertility gap actually reflect? And who most often experiences unrealized fertility? So on the one hand, the fertility gap may reflect barriers to achieving fertility goals. If these barriers are indeed socioeconomic, then we might expect structurally marginalized groups with fewer resources to be the people who most often fail to achieve their fertility goals. This would reflect, a reproductive injustice. On the other hand, unrealized fertility, using certain measurements, demographic measurements, may instead be primarily due to changing preferences over the life course and new social norms or preferences taking hold among younger generations over time. So in this case, unrealized fertility may actually reflect reproductive agency, the ability of people to change their mind and then to adjust to their new preferences through the use of contraception and controlling their fertility. So to illustrate the implications of these different approaches to the measurement of unrealized fertility, I'm going to use data from the National Survey of Family Growth from the United States. This survey is cross-sectional, but it has 4 different metrics of fertility goals that I think will provide some interesting comparisons for us. The years I analyzed for the NSFG are between 2002 to 2019. Okay, so here are a list of 4 different measures in the survey. Metric A, this first row, is a question about ideals, and this question was last asked in 1995. The question is, if you yourself could choose exactly the number of children to have in your whole life, how many would you choose? Because it was last asked in 1995, the only way I can really do this is through kind of a synthetic cohort approach and examine how a cohort reaches their previously stated ideals. Metric B is a question about desires. The question is basically, do you want to have another baby? And with some variations in phrasing depending on whether or not the person is currently pregnant or has experienced infertility. Metric C is about intentions, has a really nice little prelude of saying sometimes what people want and what they intend are different because they're not able to do what they want, and then asks the respondent, do you intend to have another baby at some time? And then metric D is this interesting question about consequences and regret, and asks, if it turns out that you do not have any additional children, would that bother you a great deal, some, a little, or not at all? Kind of consistent with previous measures of unrealized fertility in the literature, for these last three metrics, B, C, and D, I'll take the approach of looking at desires and intentions near the end of the reproductive life course, so ages 40 and older. So starting with the measurement of ideals, I plot the fertility trajectories of a synthetic cohort over the past 25 years. So stratifying across race and ethnicity. The orange line represents white women, and that light blue line at the bottom is women who selected other race. And you can see at the end of their reproductive years, white and other race women are those who end up having the largest fertility gap. When we look at these trends instead across educational attainment, we see that women who are college graduates, that's that green, the green line at the bottom. Women who are college graduates end up having the largest fertility gap using this approach. So this kind of picture emerges where it's like more privileged groups, those who are less structurally marginalized are actually the ones who have the largest fertility gap. And we know from literature this is consistent with arguments about delaying fertility because of education and pursuits and that sort of thing. But if we look at metric B, looking at the difference between, looking at those who still desire another child or desire a child after the age of 40, kind of a counter-narrative appears in which Black, Hispanic, and other race women are the ones that have significantly larger desires at the end of the reproductive life course compared to white women. And a similar with education. It's actually those who have less than a high school education who are left having intentions to have children after the age of 40. And metric C has a little bit more of mixed results. So with race, we see Black and other race women, Black and other race women are more likely to intend another child after the age of 40. But then here it's kind of the opposite. It's the college-educated women who are more likely to say that they intend to have a child after the age of 40. And lastly, looking at kind of this question of like perceived consequences or regret, white and other race women are significantly more likely to say that they would be bothered if they do not have another child, and then women with more education. So in this way, kind of the consequences regret question mirrors more the ideals question. So that was a lot there, so I've created a little summary here for you. Importantly, let's show you this column here. This is just a kind of a measure of prevalence. If we were just measuring unrealized fertility based off of desires, we'd find that about 19% of women over age 40 desire another child. But if we were just using intentions as our measure of unrealized fertility, it's significantly smaller. Only 3% of women say that they intend to have a child. Then if we look at this question about consequences regret, it goes a little bit higher, back up to 14%. So you can just see there's a pretty wide range here of what unrealized fertility is, depending on the measure that we use. And then on this last column here, in question of who experiences it, is also a very different response depending on the metric that we use. So, how should we define and measure this? Is it having fewer children than desired or intended earlier in the life course? Is it an inability to achieve your ideals? Is it delay and not having your desires and intentions at a time in the life course in which it's less likely that you'll actually achieve these things? Is it fertility-related disappointment or regret or barriers? I'm actually going to advocate, I think all of these can tell us different things, but it's really important to differentiate and to explain why we're using the metric that we're using. And then I also would like to advocate for more of a focus on barriers, because it's something that concrete that people can report that they're experiencing and helps us understand. So I'm proposing kind of a new conceptual model of of unrealized fertility to bring all of these things together. And so I'm very open to feedback on thinking about this, but I think it's really important when we talk about unrealized fertility to distinguish between social determinants and social causes and biological causes, and importantly, recognize how, wrong button, okay, recognize how these social determinants can then impact biological causes, and then biological causes and social can also impact desires and intentions. So just to give you kind of like a completely random case scenario for this. We might think about a person, thank you, who really wants to have a baby, but here experiences multiple repeated miscarriages and eventually decides, like, no, this is too much work, this is too much of a burden, and because of these experiences, then no longer intends to have a child. So in a survey, when asked about their intentions, they will say no, but in fact, they do have unrealized fertility. So thinking about how all of these things relate together. So just in a quick model that does kind of separately account for these things, here is just predicted odds of unrealized fertility based off of desires among women ages 40 in the United States. So we can see that both, social and biological determinants are at play here. So we still see these racial differences emerging, race ethnicity differences emerging with Black and other race women having higher odds of desiring another child. There are some kind of physiological, biological predictors in here that are not so significant except for infertility. People who have experienced infertility have higher odds of desiring another child. And then looking at intentions, again, we have some racial ethnic differences that are evident here, but also this one, people who've experienced pregnancy loss are more likely to be pushed into intending to have another pregnancy later in their life. And so there's a lot of attention paid to some of the social causes. We can also imagine how some of these, like pregnancy loss, is this biological experience that obviously is stratified across the population. In the US in particular, Black women have much higher odds of experiencing miscarriage relative to white women. So we can think about how, the biological and the social are intertwined here. So thank you so much. Thank you all, and I really look forward to kind of thinking about this and brainstorming and hearing your feedback on this. Thanks so much.